When I was in high school, I was fortunate enough to have a classical guitar class that I took, and right next to that in one semester was an English class. Now, what would often happen in English class, I would kind of daydream a bit, visualize the guitar music that I would be working on in class, kind of think about the melodies and the chord shapes, and I'd be doing a little bit of air guitar kind of on my wrist. I would pretend my arm here was a fretboard, and I would be singing little melodies to myself. And at the time, I didn't really think much of this, but it turns out this is actually a really effective practice technique to do and something you might want to incorporate into your own practice routine. And so in this video, I want to do a bit of a deep dive on what mental practice really is, why it's effective, why you should consider adding it to your routine, and some of the benefits you can get from it. Hey, my name is Beau. I'm a musician and music teacher, and on this channel, I talk about practice techniques and things you can do to learn music more effectively and more efficiently. So when it comes to mental practice, really what it is, it's the act of actually visualizing or hearing in your mind, audiating, the things you will be working on your instrument. So this could involve many different senses. This could involve using the sense of sight to visualize the keyboard or the fretboard of your guitar or of a violin or something like that. You might use your visual sense to imagine the actual music notation. You're going to be using your auditory sense and your audiation skills to actually be hearing the melodies that you'll be playing and the chord progressions and the bass lines and the harmonic functions. You're going to be actually thinking of the motor movements that you'll be using. You may even move your hands a little bit and get into some air guitar or some air violin. And so that's actually what it is. In terms of actually doing it, the surprising thing is how effective it really is. Now, many famous musicians over the course of history have commented on the fact that if they just open a piece of sheet music, they can read the sheet music silently in their mind, they can audiate it and understand it, and they can even visualize how it would be played on a piano or a guitar or a violin or something like that. And many professional musicians are actually able to fully learn pieces by just sitting with the music notation. You could even do the same thing if you just had a recording of the piece. Many skilled musicians can hear a recording of a basic piece and get the gist of it, and they would know how to play it on their instrument before they even actually get to their instrument. And they could even practice it silently in their own mind. There's been many times I've been on an airplane or on my breaks at work or all kinds of situations where I will actually engage in this kind of mental practice. And the interesting thing is that new research is starting to show that this is not just kind of hype that professional musicians are talking about. This is actually something you can do to enhance your practicing and should probably be something you do to incorporate. This should be something you incorporate in your practice routine if you're a serious musician. Now, the core benefits that I notice, and this may be a little bit of a different take than what you hear out there, is it really fuses your audiation with your motor movements in a way that is very, very obvious and very, very secure. And so what I'm pointing at here is a lot of musicians, when they're playing their instrument, their musical ear is kind of just keeping along with what they're doing, but they're not really using their musical ear as the driver of their performance. So they could be playing a piece, maybe on the piano, and if I ask them, wait, can you stop for a sec and just sing the bass line of the piece that you're playing, the piece that you've been working for weeks and months on? Many great piano players, even people that are very technically skilled, they cannot actually sing the bass lines of what they're working on. They cannot actually sing little inner harmonic lines or even recognize the chord progressions of the songs that they're working on. And what that actually means is there's a disconnect between their motor skills and their audiation skills. And so what mental practice does is it really allows you to put the audiation skills back in the driver's seat. And the way that this functions is that when you actually imagine a piece of music silently in your mind or you audiate it, it forces you to connect with the sound in a way that you may not connect with while you're just playing that piece on your instrument. Singing also provides the same kind of feedback mechanism. So if you're playing a piece that has a melody in it, you're obviously not able to sing full-blown series of chord changes and harmonies, but if you're playing a piece that has a melody to it, if you can't hum the rhythm and just the general pitches of the melody, it's very likely that when you're playing your instrument, you're doing something that is very much a motor skill, and you could even be playing the right rhythms, but you're not audiating the actual melodies of the of the songs very thoroughly. And what mental practice can do is, as you spend some time either singing the passage or silently hearing it in your mind, it can make sure that you're giving your mind the time it needs and the skill it needs to develop the ability to let the melodic content or the rhythmic content really lead the charge and put the motor movements in the background. And that's really what I notice as the main benefit of, or one of the main benefits of mental practice, is that we often put the motor movements first and the audiation is behind it. And so one of the symptoms of putting the motor movements first and the audiation behind it is not being able to hum the bass lines of what you're playing, not being able to recognize the chord changes. So if you were playing maybe a piano tune with a certain set of chord changes, and I played you the same chord changes with different voicings or just subtly different inversions, if you cannot recognize the other voicings or inversions as being somewhat related to what you're doing, it's a sign that you're probably focusing more on the motor movements of just playing the right notes and not really involving your ear in the process. And I found that spending time in the practice session, doing mental practice and actually trying to hear the sounds of the tones and the rhythms, it lets you kind of recouple the motor movements with the audiation skills. And that's really what mental practice can do. Now, one of the other benefits of mental practice is it tends to lead to more secure performances because you'll memorize your pieces better. And so if you look at the science of learning and learning psychology and what is an effective way to memorize something, probably one of the most ineffective ways to actually memorize something is to either reread it, re-listen to it, or in the case of being a musician, to replay it many, many times. Now, unfortunately, a lot of musicians, in terms of their mental model and what they think is going to help them learn a piece well, is just playing it over and over again. And so, I'm not saying you can't memorize a piece by playing it over and over again, but it tends to not be a very effective once you start getting into learning whole concert kind of repertoire catalogs and like 15 different pieces, or if you're a jazz musician, you're going to do like a 30-song set. It's not a very efficient way to practice by just playing the pieces over and over and over again. What's a more effective way to learn to memorize things is to use retrieval practice. And as far as the science goes, case is closed on this being one of the most effective ways that you can actually memorize things is using retrieval practice. And so what is retrieval practice? It's just the act of actually retrieving things from your mind without a scaffold. And so if you're trying to learn how to memorize a piece, you need to get the sheet music away. If you're trying to learn how to memorize a piece and you're using the recording to learn it, you're starting it from more of an oral perspective and not a sheet music perspective, you need to be able to play the piece with the recording turned off. Now, this sounds kind of obvious, but a lot of people actually struggle with putting time into memorizing pieces if that's not a skill that they developed as they were growing up or when they were developing musicians. And so mental practice actually is retrieval practice. The act of actually, say you're working on a 16-bar phrase, closing the book, getting away from the sheet music, and try to play the piece from memory. That's a fantastic thing to do. But I would say an even better thing to do, or a better thing to do as a complementary activity, is to try to just mentally summon everything without even your instrument. And so there's a little bit of a tiered system here. First, we have the notation, and we're playing with the notation. That's great. Then you could actually memorize the song where you could play it on the guitar or the piano without the support of the notation, but you're still subtly relying on the support of the instrument giving you the feedback. So I may be playing a song and I'm following along with it, and I'm looking at my fretboard or my keyboard of the piano while I'm playing, and that's kind of keeping me on track. But the question is, can I even remove the piano or the guitar from the situation and fully hear this piece in my mind? Can I visualize what the chord changes would look like on my instrument? Can I hear the song? Could I hear the tones and the rhythms in my mind? Could I also hear the interpretive elements? And that really is a different skill. And what you'll find is if you can fully keep track of a whole program of tunes in your mind without even the instrument, the song ends up being memorized at what I would say a much deeper level, at a more secure level, because when you're actually on stage or performing for somebody, what happens is it's easy with the instrument because you could do this in like the silence of the forest and just concentrate on the piece and visualize it and audiate it in your mind. When the instrument is put in your hands and you have that extra support of the instrument and you still don't have the sheet music, it's almost like a joke to just play the song from memory. And so that's another benefit of mental practice, is that it'll help you memorize tunes very securely if you use it for that purpose. And the last thing that I would say is that it really enhances the interpretive side of your performance. And again, the reason that it can do this is because you're starting with a sound-based phenomena. I find a lot of musicians struggle to perform those pieces or interpret them with the kind of expressiveness and dynamics and phrasing that they want and shaping, because they're actually focusing a lot on the motor movements. Their attention is kind of strapped into what their hands and what their fingers are doing, instead of really placing their attention on the sound and the musical punchline they're trying to make. And so if you take a step back and not even do mental practice on the motor movements and try to visualize the motor movements, just visualize the song and really ham the interpretation up in your mind. If you have a very clear mental picture of what you want it to sound like, when you're playing your instrument, you're kind of being guided by that very clear mental representation, that audiated representation, and that will lead to a better performance. Now, in terms of the practicalities for how do you start incorporating mental practice into your routine, there's kind of two ways that I would go about this. The first way is a hybrid approach where you learn to do mental practice while you have access to the sheet music and specifically your instrument. So you may play 4 bars of a piece, or even something smaller, 2 bars of a piece, listen to it very intently, and then attempt to summon the sound of that melody in your mind. Now, there's a few different ways you could do this. You could actually just do the sound. So you could try to just hear the sounds and the pitches and the rhythms, or you could actually visualize the motor movements at the same time. And those are both really valuable skills to do. So I will often do mental practice where I will silently kind of hum along with the tune in my mind. And I will do that either while I'm kind of air guitaring along with it, and I will also spend some time doing it without the kind of air guitar. They're both valuable things to do. And so that's a really fantastic way to get started with mental practice, where you're going back and forth between like play a small section, try to visualize it on your instrument, try to visualize the sheet music, and specifically try to audiate the music as well as you can. Try to hear the sounds very clearly. In the beginning, this is difficult to do for some people, but this really is a skill that can be developed, and it's a wonderful practice tool. And so the most basic way to get started with it, bounce back and forth between your instrument and your mind. And if you're new at this, start with very small fragments. You could even start with a piece that you already have learned. And so you could play a short section of a piece you've learned, and then try to mentally summon it as clearly as you can. And I like putting the emphasis on the sound and then the motor movement. So I like to do some mental practice with just the sound of the piece. And then I try to do mental practice where I'm letting the sound kind of take center stage in my mind, but I'm kind of miming the movements. And you can physically mime the movements, that's totally fine. Or you can just mentally kind of do the kinesthetic thing. And they're both fantastic things to do, but I like putting the sound as the center stage, because when we're performing, we want our minds to be anchored into the sound and the interpretive elements of the sound, and not so much what our body is doing. And so that's how I would get started with mental practice. Now, if you're a more advanced musician, or you feel like you're ready for this, you can do mental practice completely away from the instrument, completely away from sheet music, and completely away from recordings. And so my favorite thing to do for this kind of practice, I'm really just taking my dog for a walk, or I'm doing cardio, or I'm just laying down and kind of relaxing, and I will attempt to mentally retrieve everything in terms of what I'm working on for a piece. So I will have the piece kind of broken into like an A section, a B section, and a C section, and I will go through the same process. I will try to mentally retrieve both the sounds and the motor movements and the interpretive elements. And that is a little bit more advanced. It's more difficult for people to do because you don't have an instrument to go back and forth with. So when you have your instrument, you can rely on the sheet music and the instrument to kind of give you some feedback. So you try to mentally hear something and it might seem kind of fuzzy, like not really much is there. Then you play it on the instrument and you're like, oh yeah, that's what that sounds like. I get it. And then going back and forth between the two is a really effective way to do that. Now, when you take the instrument and the recordings and the sheet music away, you're really just on your own. It's a more difficult thing to do, but essentially it's going to really supercharge your audiation. And if you do it properly in terms of running through like the A section of a piece and then a B section and then the C section, it'll really help secure your memory for the piece. And at some point, if you do this enough, you will notice that your concentration abilities are just through the roof. I mean, when I really got into doing this, I always did this as a teenager. And so I think I developed this skill like reasonably early. But in the last 5 or 6 years or so, I'm able to go for like a hike for like an hour or even an hour and a half, and I can fully just remain concentrated on doing mental practice while I'm going for like a slow hike around a forest or something. And that's a really nice thing to do. And in my own personal practicing, I usually do about a 50-50 ratio between mental practice and physical practice. And if you're not used to doing this, that can sound absurdly high. It can sound like, wow, like, wouldn't I get more done if I just did more physical practice? And the answer is not really. I find that I get more done when I incorporate a lot of mental practice, because most of the problems that you're actually encountering as a musician are not physical and technical challenges. They are mental challenges. You don't have a clear audiation or mental representation of the piece. You may not be able to visualize the chord changes on your instrument. And like I said before, when I talked about retrieval practice, just looking at your instrument more is not necessarily going to help that. Just looking at the sheet music more is not necessarily going to help that. Listening to the music 100 times doesn't necessarily give you the ability to memorize things and kind of burn them in your mind. And so, again, it seems like 50% kind of physical practice, 50% mental would be a really whacked out ratio. But if anything, I prefer more mental practice to physical practice, because you really have to concentrate to do it. And it'll just enhance your concentration and it'll enhance your musical skills so much. And just your ability to memorize pieces will go through the roof once you learn this. So that's a bit of a crash course on what mental practice is, some of the benefits, how to get started with it. If you have experience using mental practice and you find it helpful or challenging, I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. Again, my name is Beau. I'm a musician and music teacher that offers online piano and guitar lessons. If you're interested in that, hit me with an email. Check out this next video if you found this topic interesting. Thanks so much for tuning in.